Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of myself, Dr. Ina Siddiqui, and my colleague at Comstech, Ms. Khazima Muazzam, I would like to welcome all of you in the Comstech International Webinar Series. Today we have 10th of its kind webinar, and we have yet another very eminent speaker with us. So without taking much of your time, I request all the participants to kindly keep your microphones on mute mode so that we can listen our speaker loudly and clearly. And now I request my very dear teacher and Coordinator General Comstech, Professor Dr. Mohammad Iqbal Chaudhry, for introductory remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Good morning, good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Excellency Professor Dr. Zakri, Abdul Hamid, Excellency Professor Dr. Ataur Rahman, we are extremely fortunate to have both of you in this Comstech distinguished speakers series. Hina said this is the 10th one. It has a very special significance because this event of today touches an extremely important issue, and that is a cross-cutting issue, because all over the Muslim world and in the developing world, key issues are related to how we govern and governance with reference to how much science and technology is deployed. Never in the history of humanity we have seen how important it is to develop indigenous capacity in the field of science and technology, which we have seen in case of pandemic. And this is the key message of today's extremely important event. Our speaker would be introduced by our dear teacher and mentor, Professor Dr. Ataur Rahman. Professor Dr. Ataur needs no introduction. He is one of those towering personalities. The impact of his personality and his contributions, not only in Pakistan, but beyond Pakistan and in the Muslim world and all over developing world, is internationally recognized. Professor Ataur Rahman is a former Minister for Science and Technology, Minister for Information Technology, Chairman, Higher Education Commission, and currently he holds lots of important responsibilities as chairman of many task force which Prime Minister of Pakistan has constituted. We have invited Professor Ataur Rahman to introduce his very dear friend, Professor Dr. Zakri, and this is indeed an honor for us to have both of them together on this forum of Comstech. Thank you, sir. Sir, your mic need to be unmuted, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce my dear friend and brother, His Excellency Professor Zakri Abdul Hamid, who I have known for many decades and who is a dear friend. Professor Hamid has shown the way in Malaysia in terms of the development of science and technology for a long, long time. And he has led this initiative with an enormous amount of wisdom and energy. We live in a world, ladies and gentlemen, where natural resources have diminishing importance. And knowledge has become the key driver for socio-economic development. And if countries such as Pakistan or Malaysia or other Islamic countries are to progress, we have to realize that we have to invest in our real power, which is our youth, through education, through science, through technology, and through innovation and entrepreneurship. And this is what Malaysia has been doing for many years, originally under the leadership of His Excellency Mahathir Mohamad, and later amongst other leaders. And this is the path that Malaysia has also shown to other countries. Professor Zakri Abdul Hamid is currently the chairman of the ATRI advisory. He's also the chairman of PCSD Malaysia, and also the Pro-Chancellor of Multimedia Universities in Malaysia. He was a science advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia and former director of the Institute of Advanced Studies, UN University. He's also the founding chair of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and former member of the UN Secretary General's Scientific Advisory Board. He sits on the Global Leadership Council of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and is a member of the Islamic Development Bank Scientific Advisory Board and vice chair of the Governing Council of the UN Technology Bank for Least Developing Countries. He was previously the joint chair of the Malaysian Industry Government Group for Higher Technology, MITE. Among the many awards that he has received include the 2019 UN Malaysia Award, the 2018 Midori Biodiversity Award, the 2017 ASEAN Biodiversity Hero Award, and the 2014 Zayed International Prize for the Environment. Professor Zakri Abdul Hamid will be talking to us today about the role of science and technology and its advisory that it can play in governments, and especially with the COVID situation now, the importance of science, as Professor Iqbal Chaudhry has rightly pointed out, is become all the more illustrated that science has to play a critically important role in tackling such global problems as pandemic presently, but also problems related to poverty and other issues. So with these words, I'd like to invite Professor Zakri Abdul Hamid to kindly make his presentation. Thank you. इकबाल आवाज आ रही है?
जी सर, मुझे आवाज आ रही है आपकी. Somehow bandwidth here is not so good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, Dr. Zakri.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I thank you, Dr. Atta Rahman, for your generous introduction of myself. I'm very honored and also very delighted to be sharing the same podium with two legendary global figures from Pakistan, namely Professor Atta Rahman and also my dear friend Professor Iqbal Chaudhry. I'm very honored to be giving this lecture. To all the listeners, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh from Malaysia. Let me start with the first slide. Okay, next slide, please. This is the outline of my lecture. I'll be taking you on different phases, starting with my personal journey, then the principles and practice of science advice, walking the talk, and concluding remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share with you some of my vantage point. What I have to say during this lecture is arising from my years of experience. In fact, more than 35 years in the realm of science advice diplomacy at the national, regional, and global level. So I started out, as many of us, as a research scientist and an academic at the National University of Malaysia. Then I have some experience as a senior university administrator in that university. But as I expand the scope of my experience, it would include being a diplomat as a negotiator of UN treaties on behalf of my country. Then some experience at the UN University's Institute of Advanced Studies in Japan, and a number of other positions as mentioned by Dr. Atal Rahman. That include to be a member of the Ban Ki-moon Scientific Advisory Board, founding chair of IPBES, and finally also as a science advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia. So my lecture is really arising from my own personal experience through the years. Next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a younger picture of myself more than 30 years ago as science science technical advisor in the negotiation of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity. Next. That includes also some roles in chairing the plenary session of key meetings of science advice at UN level. This is a picture of one of those plenary sessions in Nairobi, Kenya. Next slide. And besides being the science advisor now and then, I would also lead the delegation of Malaysia in this meeting. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, let us talk a little bit on the principles and practice of science advice. And this is captured in the fairly new global initiative, which was founded in 2014, the International Network of Government Science Advice, or INGSA, led by the former science advisor to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Sir Peter Glotman. This INGSA operates under the aegis of the International Science Council. It's concerned with all dimensions and levels of science advice, networking, capacity building. So it's getting traction. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to liken INGSA as the last jigsaw piece of a big jigsaw puzzle linking the science community with the policymakers and the politician. And just to fast forward today, in fact, this linkage between science and the policymakers and the politician is very crucial if we are going to correct some of the problems facing the world today. In particular, as you see how we manage the pandemic COVID-19. Next. So, science policy nexus is evolving. The nature of science is changing. The relationship between science and society is changing. The nature of policy making is evolving. So there is a symbiotic linkage between society and the policymakers. More and more today, we are relying on evidence-informed policymaking as the core issue. Of course, for this nexus to be successful, we have to engage different targets. Not only the politicians and the policymakers, but also the public, the media, the agencies, the cities, and international organizations. Next slide. The science policy nexus was hedged after the global community faced a lot of challenges. As you can agree, virtually every challenge government's face has a scientific dimension, which may or may not be recognized. But science alone does not make policy. It has many values and political consideration. But the main issue here, the presumption that governments are more likely to make better choices when they use well-developed evidence wisely. For instance, what is a fact? What is data? Is robust science available? Who defines it as robust, reliable? Will it be used, misused, manipulated, or ignored? Next. So if you look at this interface, science and policy making are distinct cultures, methods, and epistemologies. The place of societal values is very different in science and policy making. But there is increasing recognition of the value of boundary structures to link this culture. The nature of the interaction is influenced by context, culture or country, and history, and by the relationship between science and society. How this interaction operates will depend on the framings of intent by different parties. As you can look at this diagram here, there's a linkage between science, policy, and society. So the three elements here is bounded by their common aspiration. Next slide. Policy is rarely determined by evidence, but policy can be and should be informed by evidence. This is easier said than done, of course, because you can have all the good evidence available, but if it is not taken in, it is not really useful. So inputs into policy would include the science, very big, evidence of need, possible solutions and impact, public opinion, political ideology, electoral contract, diplomatic issues. These are the elements in the scheme of things. And political ideology is very important. As you can see today, one of the leaders of the superpowers is not too keen on science. And you can see the negative impact that policies have on what is in his country. I'm talking about the obvious, of course. Next. And of course, science in the 21st century, as Dr. Atal Rahman would agree, increasingly science is embedded within society rather than standing apart from it. It is now a tool of national and international development and is placed in a more utilitarian framing by governments. One of the milestones of this would be the establishment of the United Nations Secretary General Scientific Advisory Board, of which I am one of the 26 members, where for the first time, science advice is placed at the highest level of international governance. But it is not without its shortcomings, of course. And also depend on personality. When Ban Ki-moon was Secretary General, he relies a lot on the Scientific Advisory Board, but his successor is still not in a mood to establish a new Scientific Advisory Board. The need for science in the policy process is increasingly claimed. But there's also the issues of the crisis in science. We talk about whether scientific facts can be endorsed, can be believed by the public. This relates to the quality and quantity. And also, ladies and gentlemen, when you talk about science and technology, that should include the issue of the social sciences, which is key to the dynamics of science advice. And of course, the nature of science itself has changed and is changing. Next slide. Changing nature of science is not only from linear to non-linear, it's also from singular to multidisciplinary systems based. And this is reflected in the role of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, or also in the role of the IPBES. This is its counterpart for biodiversity. Science is also more complex and from certainty, it can be probabilistic, and also we will watch on the impact of big data and artificial intelligence, and definitely from normal to post-normal. Next slide. So to summarize on this aspect, the changing nature of science. Science is complex, facts uncertain, much which is unknown, stakes are high, decision making is urgent, and there is a high values component. All this thing is also called as the post normal science. Next. So the post-normal perspective, most of the problem we face today is often termed as post-normal, where the analysis is complex, multiple, and the knowledge uncertain and incomplete, values in dispute, stakes are high. What I'm trying to say here is there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the advice given by the scientific community. I also mentioned again, when you talk about science, it's not only the natural sciences, but also the importance of social sciences, the humanities. In fact, in many cases now, the humanities, the social sciences are more crucial in science advice to be given or rejected. So failure to recognize these issues can make policymakers and politicians skeptical about the utility of science. Next. And one other aspect is about values. Science is not values free. Scientists make values based decisions all the time. What to study, what methodology, what is considered sufficient evidence for conclusion. But the scientific method is designed to limit the influence of human values on the collection and analysis of data. But the biggest value judgment in science are the quality and sufficiency of data on which to reach a conclusion. This is also one of the biggest assets of science advice, which is evidence-based. And of course, how science is used by society is intimately and inherently values-rich. And policy too is. Next. The challenge of science being used as a proxy for values debate. This is very well known. Societal values discussion are difficult. And as we increasingly found out, politicians often avoid them. Science has frequently been misused as a proxy for what are primarily values debate. And this could include climate change, GMOs, reproductive technologies, stem cells, and so on. Science cannot usually resolve irreconcilable worldviews. Next, please. So the challenge of science and the policy societal nexus would include the following. Too much science. Secondly, the changed nature of science. The challenge of values within and beyond science. the post-normal nature of much science today, post-truth, different perception of expertise, and so on. Next. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's see some example of walking the talk where I have some experience. From my vantage position, I think for the science policy to really be owned up by the public, by countries, is incumbent upon scientists to link up with political leaders. One of the recent experience is when IPBEST, where I was the founding chair of this intergovernmental platform on biodiversity and ecosystem services, released its report 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 2019, which include the claim that we found that 100 million species are in danger of extinction. That doesn't mean much if we are to release that report. But what happened was the IPBEST leadership in 2019, they were releasing this report in Paris. They had an audience with President Macron of France, who was informed about the finding, and the president immediately promised to take up the case. He was then, I think, the chair of G20. So that is how the issue of global biodiversity loss got registered big time among international or among global leaders. We, the IPBEST, copied this from the experience of the Nobel-winning IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Next. Where you will recall the IPCC, which is a scientific body, never really got notice until they link up with political leader like Al Gore, who championed the cause of global warming. The rest, as they said, was history. Al Gore and the IPCC were rewarded the Nobel Peace Prize for articulating the danger of global warming. So, linking up with scientists is very important. Next. And from my own experience, this is very true. Linking with influential politicians like Dr. Mahathir Mohamad here, and also next. And I worked for 10 years under Prime Minister Najib. The interesting thing about politicians, they are very simple. Their request is very simple. They don't really care about the details of the scientific advice. But what they need to know is whether the science advice can improve the livelihood of their citizens, meaning they could get better income, better jobs, and alleviate poverty. So the request is practical and pragmatic. Next, and in our part of the world, of course, Dr. Atal Rahman is legendary. He's not only a proclaimed scientist in his own right, but he's also a minister, and many roles that he played until today. He can attest and vouch on the need for the scientists to work with our political masters. Next. Ladies and gentlemen, as we look for today, the greatest challenge is the 2030 Development Agenda and the 17 SDGs, which range from alleviating poverty to protect the planet, the oceans, the seas, and the forests. And to achieve success of these 17 goals, science has to be the underpinning of all the aspirations, goals, and targets embodied in the 17 SDGs. Science, technology, and innovation has to be the solution. Next. Science policy nexus also should reach out to the highest level. This is a picture of some of the science advisors to Ban Ki-moon. But as a member of this eminent body, I personally felt that its impact is not very successful. Why? For one thing, the fundings for us to carry out our work is not forthcoming from the secretary. So we couldn't do much work over there. But as a think tank, some of our reports are quite far-reaching, where we argue of the role of science, technology, and innovation for sustainable development. Next slide. And this is one example of the science policy nexus, where the Prime Minister of a country requested science to provide the answer. Next. And if you are in my region, Southeast Asia, for many years, one of our problems during the dry season is the burning of forests in our countryside, which resulted in haze. And you know, interestingly, science has the answer to combat the haze, but the political will of some of the leaders in the region is not forthcoming. So what is supposed to be quite a straightforward answer cannot be delivered, because among the science policy nexus, the policy or the political will is missing. Next. And for many years, we have faced this problem, which caused a lot of economic damage, and also health damage, and also education when children couldn't go to school. So what I'm saying here also is the science advice, the science policy nexus now is very important. Next. And one of that definitely or the road to creating this awareness among the policymakers, and also creating the political will among political leaders, is the need for education and public awareness, capacity building. This morning I had a chat with the ambassador from Sweden. Sweden, as you may recall, is the #1 country on sustainable development, and used to be a poor country. But according to the ambassador, the key to Sweden being what they are today is education. And they have started on this awareness of the importance of the environment, for instance, very early on. That is why today Sweden, despite being a small country, is a leader in sustainable development. And their companies like Volvo, Ericsson, and a few others are really world beaters, and showing the way that sustainability would eventually ensure profits and prosperity for the company and the country. Next. So my concluding remarks, ladies and gentlemen, is very simple. Next. Science has never been more important as it is today, and that is manifested in the crisis that all of us are facing now, the COVID-19 crisis. This can also be seen as the biggest science advice or science diplomacy challenge the world has faced together since the Second World War. It's the words of Sir Peter Drummond, and as we can see clearly that the source of this pandemic is scientific in nature, and that is the destruction of the habitat of wildlife. So as we navigate our way to develop some stimulus package which ensure socio-economic well-being, health well-being, we must also not forget the environment, those habitats. So with that, once again, thank you so much for taking time to listen to my lecture, and I thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Zakri, for a very interesting and comprehensive which covered many dimensions. It highlighted the importance and the various facets of science advisory, the importance of the linkages between science, policy, and society. Iqbal, are we going to have questions and answers here, or how do we proceed further?
Yes, sir. I think we would have question and answer, but you may like to format it as you wish. You may have your remarks also.
I think we can have question and answers now, and then I can give some concluding remarks after that.
Sure, sir. Can I ask a question to Professor Zakri?
Yes, go ahead, please.
The answer, I mean, you actually brought so much of your own experience in this presentation, an absolutely phenomenal presentation of your lifelong experience of working with the government, with the politicians, with lots of international and national fora. I just wanted to know, you see, you said something extremely important about science and its values. You say science is not valueless, it has its own values. And I was wondering whether occasionally these values contradict with the normal cultural and religious values. And I'm really asking you in the context of the OIC world, the Islamic world, because the clash of values may hinder the development of science and technology. So if science has its own values, it may contradict on.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Ansari, my question was clear to you as there was some problem with the sound.
It's okay. I can.
Thank you, sir. Please go ahead.
Please, Professor Zakri.
I think values, in particular cultural and also religious, would always be there. But science, in the most part, I don't think it could contradict those, one, the religious values, secondly, the cultural values. Because science also is not absolute, you know. The scientific hypothesis rules, uh, and we shouldn't worry too much about it. Let's look at the global challenges today. Even the 17 development goals would coincide with the interests of the Ummah in the OIC countries. Take SDG number 1, no poverty. SDG number 2, no hunger. SDG number 3, good human well-being. Those values are demanded by the Ummah. So I think instead of looking for contradiction, I think religious values in the pure sense would support the aspiration of the 2030 development agenda. I think there's more pros than cons to the issue about the clash between science and religious or cultural values. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zakri. I would also like to ask one question. In most of the OIC member countries, there is no organized effort for making science policy. There are very few countries which have carried out proper organized foresight exercises, for instance, on the Delphi pattern or any other organized policy making exercises. And often it is random. It depends on who the Minister of Science is, who the Prime Minister of the country is, and what importance is given to science and technology without really an intensive consultation with the various sectors of the society, and then coming forward with a coherent, time-bound vision, strategy, and action plan, which has to be regularly revised and implemented. So do you feel that these kind of exercises are important and should be undertaken, and there should be a greater awareness of the methodologies involved in science policy formulation and their execution? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Atar Rahman. This is a very good question. To start with, I think you and comstech in Pakistan, in the region, has done a commendable job in trying to attempt to provide this scientific vision to the OIC. Unfortunately, as we observe through the years, these efforts has not gained traction for various reasons, I think. One is the fractured nature of the 57 member countries of the OIC. This is where some problem exists, because sometimes politics won the day. I only wish that science could be neutral and could be a tool for the Ummah to improve themselves. There is, of course, the Islamic Development Bank. that should weigh in and assist the OIC to provide support for such an initiative like the foresight that you mentioned, Professor Rahman. But being a mega group, 57 countries, sometimes they could be going in different direction, thereby losing the way or the focus, the way forward. So if you ask me, I think while we wait for the membership to unite, which is quite a long time in coming, there should be initiative of any groupings in the group that could try to advance the scientific agenda. One of them, of which myself and Professor Iqbal are involved, is a group which was established last year, comprising of countries like Iran, Qatar, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Malaysia, to promote science, technology, and innovation as a tool for our socio-economic development. So I think we need not wait for the bigger group to move. If there are support and collaboration between a number of like-minded countries, we should go ahead. I think the center that you founded in Karachi is one of the center of excellence, which can be inspiring to other countries in the OIC. So it's a big world, but we need to start somewhere. And the challenges is not waiting for us. So we must do something. So I agree with you. You know, there are attempts in the past, but we must not lose hope. We must forge ahead. Thank you.
I would just like to add on a little bit to that, because Professor Iqbal Chaudhry, as you know, has taken over as the Coordinator General of Comstech a few months ago. And this is a new dawn for Comstech. And and we look forward to your guidance and your leadership in showing the way forward. Now, my suggestion here is that we don't try to take all the 57 countries together, as you also indicated, but start our programs on the basis of a few like-minded countries, 4, 5, 6 countries, for strengthening science and technology, for cooperating in different critically important fields, including the new and emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and others, and taking the program forward. Now, within these few countries, we have some scientists of excellence. We have some institutions of excellence, and we can set ourselves together to look at the individual goals that each country has set and what those country priorities are, and see how Comstech can take those priorities forward through a vigorous collaboration between this smaller group of countries, which hopefully, once successful, will spread to others. So a systematic approach to cooperation in a few selected fields, which will make a difference. So, so my suggestion here is, number one, Professor Iqbal Chaudhry, in consultation with you, select a few group of countries. Number two, select a few key priority areas. Number three, select mechanisms, lay down mechanisms of cooperation. And one mechanism could be the STIO initiative, which I had introduced, which was based on your money for your development. So you're not actually parting with money and giving it to Comstech. Any money that is given by a country is invested within that country, but Comstech plays the part of a catalyst through helping to identify the best resource persons available in that field and meeting your objectives and your priorities. So this was a simple but a powerful idea, which unfortunately after I left in 2012 as Coordinator General Comstech was not taken forward. But now with your guidance and leadership, we can work out a program which will show a discernible impact on ground. And here I would suggest that perhaps you and Iqbal could interact together, and I would be happy to join in also, so that we start some programs under the umbrella of Comstech through your kind advisory. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, for this brilliant idea of yours. As you know, you are always ahead of your time, and this idea is being seriously considered by those countries who had met in Kuala Lumpur in November 2019. Professor Iqbal is definitely one of the leaders for that. And we have already set up sort of a mechanism of which the Malaysian Industry Government Group on High Tech will be the secretariat of this initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, this concept has been also tried by the British government under their program called the Newton. And you mentioned about your money doing things for you, which is very good. We fund our own group, but for the Newton Fund, in Malaysia we call it the Newton Informa Fund, is one of the successful international collaboration for R&D. In Malaysia, I think between the two countries, we have invested about $40 million for that project. And that program is deemed to be one of the most successful. And you're absolutely right, Dr. Atal Rahman. We cannot wait for the bigger group to move. We should start with a number of selected countries which are like-minded, and also select priority areas of common interest for those members. I think starting this way would ensure success in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ji Iqbal.
Thank you very much, sir. Excellencies, wonderful. I think it's an excellent idea. We met in Kuala Lumpur, and there was a great deal of discussion held at that point of time also, and we are looking forward to continue this absolutely wonderful idea and including some more of institution. Right from the beginning, we made it clear to everyone that this is completely apolitical. It is for the betterment of Ummah, and this is a consortium of excellence of institutions which are well-meaning and would benefit other countries of the world also. So I'm so extremely grateful, sir. I request you for your comments, and then we can have general questions from the other audience also.
Yeah, I just want to say that what a wonderful lecture we have had from Professor Zakri. He has pointed out the different aspects of science advisory and how it can impact society in different ways. The linkages between science, policy, and society, the importance of social sciences, the question of values, and education and awareness creation, which is fundamental, as was pointed out by His Excellency with the example of Sweden. So there are many areas that we can learn from and implement in our own countries. So yes, thank you very much, Professor Zakri, and you can now have other questions, Iqbal.
Yes, among lots of audience, we have a house full. We also have our dear brother and a very active person, Professor Dr. Munif Zobi, among the audience. I can see him online. And he has written a lot about science and technology, policy and societies. He was also keynote speaker in Astana, Kazakhstan, where science, technology, and innovation agenda was approved. So I would request Professor Zubi to contribute. And if he has some questions and comments, we would appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Professor Chowdhury. Good morning or good afternoon to everybody. This has been a wonderful occasion to see you, mashallah, in charge of Comstech, Professor Ata Ar-Rahman, and of course our eminent friend Tansiri Zakri, one of the champions. I think I'm in the company of 3 champions of science, technology, and innovation at the level of the OIC, really. And I think we get together today at such an important juncture in the narrative of science, technology, and innovation at the world level and at the OIC level. I think I'll pick up on a point that Tansiri Zakri raised, and that is the COVID-19 pandemic has really exposed the very fragile relationship that existed between science and the scientific community and politicians, not only in OIC countries, but throughout the world. We have seen examples of this rift between the very eminent science advisory mechanism that exists in the US, for example, in the person of Dr. Fauci and Dr. Briggs and others, and the administration over there. At the OIC level, I know that out of the 57 countries or so, not so many countries do have a national advisory mechanism on science and technology. I think only Malaysia, Pakistan, in some form or another. In Jordan, we used to have a science and technology advisor to His Majesty, but not at present. So I think there are only 5 or 6 OIC countries that have an STI advisory or science advisory mechanism as part of the STI ecosystem. Also, I think academies of sciences within the OIC, there are around 25 of them, can play such a role in cases of emergency, or if politicians in our countries call upon the services of academies of sciences. I'll conclude. I don't want to take too much time. I know you have many people who want to speak, but I think Comstech now, under the captainship of Professor Chowdhury, who is a no-nonsense guy, I know, from many meetings with him. He's action-oriented, can, as well as pick up on the ideas proposed by His Excellency Professor Rahman, but I think can also lead by providing best practices to OIC countries. For example, picking a best practice from a certain OIC country and getting that OIC country, say Malaysia or Pakistan or Iran or Turkey, to lead in a certain domain. For example, we know that, for example, the STI ecosystem in Malaysia is almost complete or as complete as possible. So that's a good model to look at by other OIC countries. In Pakistan, there are very good examples of successful organizations and institutions, including HEJ, of course, that can lead the way and influence other similar institutions throughout the Islamic world. And I think there is no better time for all of the OIC scientists, whether in office or out of office, to join hands to try and change the world, the OIC, for the better. As times, the next couple of years, 5 years, with the post-COVID world will be tough. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Brother Munif.
Can I respond to that, Prof. Iqbal?
Sure, Tansri, please.
Yeah, I
Yes,
think
please
it's
do.
it's a good idea what was proposed by Professor Zubi. This can take in the form of a network. Maybe for one of a better word, we call it the OIC Scientific Advisory Network. And it could start with a group of like-minded and experienced people like us in this discussion today, and take it to the OIC, or even just a small group of countries like what we are attempting with Professor Zakri. I am currently involved in a similar network that is called the ASEAN Scientific Advisory Network. These are 10 countries in ASEAN forming a network, and we got the funding, a small support from the International Science Council, which was chaired by Sir Peter Gluckman. I think it's worth trying. This is one way of continuing the discussion and the conversation, to form the network. And there are so many areas that we could work on, but definitely now, today, the most compelling one is the COVID-19 issue. So I think we should think more about it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions, Iqbal, from anybody else?
Anyone, any comment and question to Tansri, Professor Zakri?
If not, then I think that it falls upon me to thank Tansri, Professor Zakri, for his excellent talk. And I would also like to welcome here my friend, Professor Munif Zubi. I'm delighted to be healthy and hearty. Sorry, there is some noise at the back. So thank you very much, Professor Zakri. I wish you the best of health in these difficult times, and I wish that Malaysia would lead the way in these discussions that we have just had. And this, I think, is an excellent idea to form a network. It could be a comstech network or science advisory, which could emerge. And I suggest that Professor Iqbal should consult Professor Zubi and yourself to make sure that this network becomes a reality. And this then provides a guiding light to countries in terms of science advisory and the implementation of some of the advice into realities on ground. So with those words, sir, I would like to thank you and all the other participants for this, for your kind participation, and wish you all the best. Fi amanillah.
Thank you. Inshallah, will do.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, everyone.